It's just about 8:30, and of course that means time to talk to the doc. And our talk with Dr. Tim McKnight, presented by Mako's Pharmacy at 240 East 3rd Street in downtown Uhrichsville. Mako's Pharmacy, your local pharmacy with a caring and knowledgeable staff focused on your health. As we say good morning to Dr. McKnight, how are you?
I'm doing great.
Good.
How are you doing?
I'm doing wonderful.
Good.
Not a bad morning at all for December. If we can get through the next 2 months like this, spring will be here.
I'm ready for the days to start showing me they're going to get a little bit longer.
Boy,
it seems like it's dark by 4 o'clock.
Isn't that the truth? It just
Yeah.
and even worse when it's like yesterday, a rainy day, and it's just gloomy from the get-go. So tough to stay positive, but we got to do that, and that's what we're all about. This is the time of year that we're eating like crazy. There's so much food put in front of us, and you can't say no to those cookies and all those treats that people have been working so hard baking. But that always means that come January, it's time to start that new diet. Fad diets, it seems like every year, are out there. And some are good and some, I guess, are not so good. Boy, there's been some crazy ones over the years, actually. But I guess the best way to do this is just be sensible about what you eat and make sure that you're eating the right things. And that brought me to a topic that I stumbled upon here about vegetarian diets. And a lot of people do that. They give up meat.
Right.
And just go with a vegetarian diet. But this study, and I know I sent this to you, it talks about some heart health, some risks, and some benefits. So can it be that vegetarian diet is not all it's cracked up to be? What's the story here?
Well, this is an interesting study, and again, it's one study. So the key is don't jump on the first study you hear and think that's going to be the trend or there's a lot of proof for it. But yeah, what they concluded in this study was that meat eaters might have a slightly lower risk of strokes than vegetarians. But if you look at it closely, it's really hard to make any strong conclusions or to make any dietary recommendations based on this one study. But it was pretty interesting. They looked at pescatarianism, which is those that eat fish only as their only source of animal protein, versus vegetarians. And they included vegans in this group because vegetarians will eat dairy and eggs, but they won't have any other animal flesh. And vegans, strictly, there's no animal protein at all.
Right.
So they included that group in. So they're looking at fish eaters, vegetarians, and then regular meat eaters. And they're looking at their risk of stroke. We know that vegetarian diet or a low animal flesh diet is associated with less heart disease, but they wanted to see if there was something that happened with stroke risk based on this. So that's what they did this study.
And it's also been told that eating fish has an important fat in it.
Omega-3 fatty acids, very high in that, yes.
And that's good for the heart, right?
That's good for the heart, yes. But the question was, well, is there maybe a potential risk for increased stroke? And most strokes are like heart attacks. There's a plugging or a blocking of an artery. But about 10% of strokes are hemorrhagic, meaning they bleed. And we know that in the Eskimo population that they eat a lot of salmon and a lot of fish with a lot of this omega-3 fatty acids in their diet. They actually have a slightly higher risk of stroke, but a very low risk of heart disease.
Wow.
So there's some question here about, fish in a high fish diet, if this might be associated with an increased risk of stroke. So this study was looking at 48,000 plus people over 18 years. They studied them.
That's a long time.
That's a long time. So that just the number of people and the number of years they followed them made this observational study pretty powerful. And they tried the average age of the participants was 45, and they made sure there was no history of stroke or heart disease when they started this study. And so they gave them food questionnaires to try to look at their diet, nutritional levels at the time. They looked at their weight and their blood pressure, and what they determined at the end of the 18 years is that those that ate fish as their protein source had a 13% reduced risk of stroke compared to meat eaters.
Okay.
So fish may be a little protective against the meat-eating population.
And if I'm correct here, if the keto diet's been the big rage here with cutting the carbs, So meat is okay with that
really high
particular
in
diet.
meats of all types.
Okay.
Yes, red meats and white meats and all this kind of meat. So that may actually increase your risk of, based on this study, increase your risk slightly of stroke. And then the vegetarian group had a 22% reduction compared to the meat eaters in heart disease risk. And they thought that this was probably due to the fact that vegetarians usually have better cholesterol profiles, lower risk of diabetes and hypertension. So you have to kind of tease out all the different physiological changes with people when they consume these different diets. So what was interesting was that there was in the vegetarian group, they saw a 20% increased risk of stroke compared to meat eaters. So we can't explain that. This was not a explain the mechanism. This was an observation.
Right.
And then when they looked at this 20% increased risk of stroke in the vegetarian group, really, it sounds like a lot, but when you do the statistics, what this translates into is there are 3 more strokes per 1,000 people over a 10-year period of time. So that, boy, is that really a strong risk? I don't know. It doesn't seem like it. And one of the concerns they had, one of the explanations they said might help us understand why this happens is the vegetarians struggle with getting enough B12, they struggle with vitamin D, and they struggle with certain key amino acids. But again, this was just they were just proposing some ideas.
Sure.
So it's kind of interesting. I certainly wouldn't change my diet necessarily on this. And they pointed out that there were some strengths to this study and some weaknesses. And so we'll need to follow this over time and see what we find out.
It's fascinating, but I guess this all cuts through to what you talk about in Fit for Life, and that is be sensible and eat plenty of vegetables and fruits. Nuts are good.
Yes.
So you got to have a good blend of good food is basically the overall view here.
Right. And I've watched these studies over the years, ever since I was in graduate school in nutrition, and if you follow these, you'll conclude, well, I shouldn't eat anything because everything's going to be bad for me. Well, no, that's not the case. I think it's moderation. I think we should move towards a vegetarian diet, but I certainly think there's a time when we can have fish and there's a time we can have red meat and pork and chicken, but I do think we need to eat much less of it than what we do. And Fit for Life is all about moving us closer to a healthier lifestyle, one step at a time. And it's not about making these dramatic changes. But, when people do this, they do see really interesting changes in their health and their fitness levels and their blood cholesterol levels and all those things we measure.
If you were susceptible to heart issues, maybe a higher risk of stroke, what type of supplements should that type of person maybe be leaning toward?
Yeah, that's a really great question, and I'll tell you, I feel very strongly about this. A good quality B complex is key because a lot of us have genetic defects. We call them single nucleotide polymorphisms with enzymes that don't help us metabolize amino acids like they should. And those pathways require a lot of B vitamins, and some of us just don't get enough folic acid, B12. So rather than supplement with just B12, take the whole B complex, get everything.
Okay.
That's the most important vitamin. The most important mineral is magnesium. Magnesium is very healthy for the heart and the nervous system and the muscle, stabilizes muscles, and the heart is probably the most important muscle in the body.
And magnesium is one of those items that we're depleted of and are unaware of that.
Absolutely. Anytime you have muscle twitches or leg cramps, think I probably have some marginal, at least, deficiency in magnesium. And if you supplement with a good magnesium, you'll find a difference pretty quickly. That the spasms and those cramps go away. And
speaking of a good supplement, our friends at Mako's Market and Pharmacy, their pharmacy carries a brand that I know you are very much for, and I as well, and that is Nutriscriptive, a very solid company, very high quality of supplements, so you can't go wrong. Go to Mako's and get those supplements.
Right. We've mentioned this before. There's no FDA regulation on any supplements, so you really have to trust your vendor, and I trust Nutriscriptives.
Yes.
They've proven that they're high quality, and most importantly, when my patients use these supplements, they get results.
Absolutely. I am a person that totally is on board with that. Again, stop in and talk to the pharmacists. They're very helpful too. The pharmacists at Mako's, if you have some questions.
Yes.
And
they're so smart, but they're so humble.
Yes.
You wouldn't even think that they could give you good information, but boy, they are just a storehouse of good information.
Absolutely, and we appreciate them being our sponsor for Talk to the Doc. Great topic, and we'll do it again next Tuesday morning.
Great. Thank you. This is a good one.
Dr. Tim McKnight is, of course, on staff at Trinity Hospital, Twin City, and comes in and shares his wisdom and knowledge with us on Tuesday mornings. Again, Talk to the Doc, presented by Mako's Market and Pharmacy in Uricksville.